I'm going to tell you the biggest edge in 2024 fantasy drafts, and it's going to surprise you because it has nothing to do with running backs or even wide receivers. What's even more shocking is that this has been a skeleton key strategy since the early days of best ball, and yet it's cheaper than it's ever been. This strategy has the potential to supercharge your teams and put you in position to win the big prizes in underdog tournaments like Best Ball Mania. I'm Peter Overzet. This is the Deposit Kingdom. Let's dig into the dominant strategy for 2024 drafts and the 7 players who need to be priority targets in your drafts the rest of the way. The biggest edges in fantasy drafts normally arise from recency bias. Drafters are prone to overreact to what happened in the previous year. After Justin Herzig won the first Best Ball Mania with a hyper-fragile build where he started with 3 running backs and stopped at 4 total, BBM2 drafters lined up in droves to copy it. In 2022, the elite quarterbacks smashed. Mahomes, Allen, and Hurts all averaged over 25 fantasy points per game, and Burrow wasn't far behind. Drafters responded accordingly in 2023, taking quarterbacks higher than they've ever gone. This recency bias created the perfect storm for late-round quarterback to emerge as a dominant strategy in 2023. Not only were the elite quarterbacks expensive, but there were a plethora of intriguing late-round quarterback options. Drafters who faded the frothy quarterback prices and invested in late-round options like Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, and Brock Purdy were rewarded handsomely. A similar dynamic has played out at the running back position. Zero RB dominated in 2022. King Capital won the $1 million prize in BBM3 for the best regular season lineup, and it was a true zero RB squad where he didn't take his first running back until round 8. Again, drafters reacted strongly to this and pushed running backs further down the draft board in 2023 than we had ever seen. This created an incredible opportunity for drafters to get running backs with league-winning upside at discounted cost. Drafters who took the plunge on Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, and James Cook in the formerly scary dead zone rounds turned an incredible profit. There's an obvious takeaway here. We can't just copy and paste a strategy that worked last year onto a new ADP landscape the following year. And on top of this, zigging, while others are zagging to what worked in the previous year, can provide us with asymmetric returns. This brings us to another macro trend that played out in 2023. The elite tight ends busted. Travis Kelce didn't score more than 12 points from weeks 8 through 17. Falling in love is distracting, who knew? Mark Andrews flopped and then got hurt. George Kittle was frustratingly inconsistent. Darren Waller was an abomination, and that was before he started making music videos.
How long I gotta climb up this hill? I'm tired and I wanna be still.
End it, stop, no, please, make it stop, please, no more, no, cut it. And on top of all of that, the late round tight ends smashed last year. Sam Laporta finished as the tight end 1 on the year from the late rounds, and Trey McBride was an absolute monster down the stretch with 4 different top 3 finishes at the position. The entire list of tight ends with positive advance rates over expected is littered with players going in the late double-digit rounds. And this wasn't just hindsight bias either. Many savvy analysts adjusted their strategies to take advantage of the depth at the tight end position, due in large part to the 2023 rookie tight end class being one of the best classes we'd ever seen. Laporta, McBride, as well as guys like Dalton Kincaid and Luke Musgrave provided drafters access to tight ends with enticing profiles at highly discounted prices. It was a unique opportunity specific to the 2023 ADP landscape. So knowing how 2023 played out at tight end, I bet you can guess how the market has responded in 2024 drafts. They are now waving the elite tight ends. Didn't work last year, can't work this year. First-time elite tight end drafters touched the hot stove in 2023 and they will not be getting burned twice. But as we just discussed, you can't just jam last year's dominant strategy into a new year and expect it to work. It has to also line up with the players and profiles who are available in specific pockets of the draft. Context has to be applied. Otherwise, you're going to be trying to stick a square peg in a round hole. You might love the concept of hyper-fragile running back. Bro, it worked for Herzig. But if you try to force a start with 3 straight running backs in 2024, get ready to learn Joshua Palmer as your wide receiver 3, buddy. Trust me, I've tried it on this very channel and I hated it. By the way, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss out on draft challenge videos and more strategy deep dives like this. We have an entire playlist of evergreen videos to help you crush best ball drafts this summer. On the flip side, we have the perfect storm this year that makes elite tight ends the dominant strategy for 2024 drafts. Consider these 3 dynamics. Elite tight ends are cheaper than they've ever been, and the mid-round tight ends are more expensive, as we can see in this chart from Dan, aka the Falcon on X. The late round tight end prices remain fairly similar. Number 2, the pool of elite tight ends is bigger than it's ever been. There are legit 7 options with week winning ceilings available in drafts this year. And finally, the late round tight ends are weaker than they've ever been. Like, guys, let's be honest with ourselves. I like Noah Fant too, but let's get real. All right, so you might be thinking, okay, that's all good and well, Pete. The elite tight end cohort is cheaper than previous years. There's some nice names, but why should I care about elite tight end in the first place? The Gronks and Jimmy Grahams are long gone. 2024 Kelsey is closer to an elite podcaster than elite tight end. And besides, tight ends bust at an extremely high rate. They are the lowest scoring position in my starting lineup. I only have to start one. They're heavily reliant on TDs for their points, which we know is tough to predict. Hell, Cole Kmet averaged almost the same amount of points per game as George Kittle this year. Relax. Relax. Honestly, relax. The reason is because of how the fantasy playoffs work in these best ball tournaments and the ceiling the elite tight ends provide relative to the rest of their position. This cohort of 7 players we are about to outline can separate from the other tight ends in a significant way. When you are in a Best Ball Mania 5 Week 15 playoff pod versus 12 other teams, or a Week 16 pod versus 15 other teams, or God willing, the Week 17 finals versus 538 teams, an elite tight end gives you a potential hammer play to distance you from the other rosters. Madison Parkhill, who has done great work on the elite tight end strategy on his Substack, Reducing Uncertainty, previously did a study on where tight end spike weeks come from. Odds your elite tight end has 20 plus points, 14.8%. Odds your elite tight end has 25 plus points in a given week, 2.9%. Odds your round 6 or later tight end has 20 plus points, 2.5%. And odds your round 6 or later tight end has 25 plus points, 0.5%. So not only is it predictable where spike weeks come from, but both 20-point and 25-point games happen at a 6 times higher frequency for the elites than the later round tight ends. Sometimes this game that we play is really as simple as thinking through what you would ideally like your roster to look like if you woke up in the BBM5 finals. We've done this exercise previously to drive home the importance of Week 17 correlation. If you could make your BBM5 finals lineup on the Sunday of Week 17, you'd definitely dial up some game stacks like you would in a DFS lineup. And if you could create your dream Week 17 lineup, it would absolutely have an elite tight end on it. I promise I do not want to show up to the finals with Tyler Conklin going against Trey McGronk and Mark Andrews teams. That's bringing a knife to a gunfight, regardless of how much ayahuasca Tyler Conklin has done with Aaron Rodgers. This isn't fully to discredit late round tight end either. It's been a viable strategy for the past 3 years on Underdog. As seen in this data pulled by Parkhill in a great post on his Substack, taking 3 tight ends after round 6 has generated above average win rates for getting to the playoffs into the semifinals. Hayden Winks' work on Underdog has showed similar. The issue is that elite tight end has performed similarly in the regular season, but with even better results in the semifinals and the finals. RotoViz's Michael Dubner pulled the data on elite tight end over this same span, and you can see here how elite tight ends separated in a massive way in both 2021 and 2022, with a finals win rate nearly double the late round tight ends those 2 years. The specific examples from those years help to further illustrate the power of elite tight ends who can generate spike weeks, specifically in the fantasy playoffs. In 2021, Travis Kelce scored 36.1 points in Week 15, and Mark Andrews scored 32.6 points in Week 15. In Week 16, Andrews followed it up with another 22.5 point outing, which made him the highest owned player in the BBM2 finals at a whopping 66% ownership clip. If you've ever heard a best ball bro say, "What if he's the guy you need, dude? What if Puka Nacua just does what Puka Nacua did last year? Dude, what if D-Rob, aka DeMarcus Robinson, is him, dude? What if DeMarcus Robinson is this year's Puka Nacua? What if, bro?" Well, Mark Andrews was absolutely the guy you needed in 2021. You had basically zero chance competing against Andrews' teams in those Week 15 and Week 16 pods thanks to those spikes. A similar thing played out in 2022. George Kittle had a lower than average advance rate in the regular season, but then dropped 23.3 points in Week 15 and 27 points in Week 16. This made him the second most owned player in the BBM3 finals at 39%. Once again, an elite tight end was the guy you needed. And what makes this even crazier, Kittle only scored 10.1 points in Week 17, but it didn't matter for Pat Kerrane, who had him on his $2 million winning lineup after selecting him in round 5. Dalton Schultz was the only tight end to go off in that Week 17, but he was only on 4% of rosters, so it didn't matter. A similar dynamic played out in 2023, but this time it was with a late round tight end, Sam Laporta. And even though he was a late round selection, Laporta is an even better illustration of how valuable spike weeks are from the tight end position within the Best Ball Mania pod format. Laporta had 26.1 points in Week 15, but only 3.3 points in Week 16. So you gotta assume all those Laporta teams got wiped out, right? Wrong. He was still the third most owned player in the BBM4 finals at nearly 40%, despite doing jack shit, apologies to the kids, in Week 15. And again, it's because no other tight ends separated in Week 16, which meant it wasn't hard for the Laporta teams to sneak into the finals. The moral of the story here is that tight end spike weeks matter, and they matter so much that they can buoy flop weeks around them. So yes, if you can find an elite tight end in the late rounds, you should absolutely do that. The problem is that Sam Laportas don't grow on trees. 2023 was a historically great rookie tight end class, and Laporta was a priority target because of his insane prospect profile and landing spot. Also, real quick, I want to mention one other note on elite tight end because it's fair to be skeptical about small sample sizes and examples from only the 3 past years of BBM, but fortunately we can go way back, nearly a decade, at looking at how elite tight end fared in the original best ball format MFL 10s. It's not the exact same format. These were self-contained leagues, but it drives home how powerful elite tight ends are in best ball formats. Thanks to work done by RotoViz's Michael Dubner, we can see that since 2017, elite tight end has yielded the highest win rates in those contests, as well as the highest top 2% rates, which we can essentially use as a proxy for ceiling outcomes. And what this means is this isn't a flash in the pan. It's not even a trend. For almost 10 years, the elite tight ends have been responsible for the top best ball teams across multiple formats because of their ability to separate from the non-elites in both a single week and over the course of a season. All right, let's get to the fun stuff. How do we actually execute this elite tight end strategy in 2024 drafts? There are 7 tight ends going in the first 6 rounds this year, and all of them are targets to varying degrees. They all have intriguing profiles and paths to single game spike weeks. In his Substack post, Parkhill pulled their data from ESPN's Open Score, and you can see that all of these tight ends are still getting open at an elite level and either providing some combo of a very high catch rate and or yards after the catch. Kyle Pitts has the profile that can most easily be disputed as elite with poor numbers, but we're also talking about one of the best tight end prospects of all time who played all 17 games last year with lingering knee issues after surgery, had Desmond Ridder as his QB, and Arthur Smith as his coach. None of those things will be true for 2024. So far in my BBM5 drafts, I've taken at least one of these 7 tight ends in 38 of my 43 drafts for a hearty 88% exposure to elite tight end. Here's exactly how I'm approaching each of these 7 players. Sam Laporta is the hardest click for me because of his early round 3 price tag, which is a full 2 rounds before Mark Andrews. He's certainly an elite tight end, but he doesn't separate from these other 6 guys as a significantly better bet. It's also unfortunate that Laporta is now getting pulled up by Week 17 game stackers who want to pair him with CMC, Ayuk, or Debo, which means it's highly unlikely his price will ever fall. You can hear more about this dynamic in our NFL schedule and correlation video. My plan, I think, is to grab Laporta when he falls past ADP, and this will likely mean I end up underweight since there's a big opportunity cost to taking him over exciting wide receivers in that early third round range like Stephon Diggs and Malik Nabers. Next up, we have Travis Kelce, who is one of the greatest tight ends of all time, went nuts in the playoffs last year, got paid by the Chiefs, plays with Patrick Mahomes in one of the most pass-happy offenses in the league, and goes in the 4th round. It's not sexy, there's funner clicks, but he's a target here for me, and I want to be overweight on Kelce by the close of Best Ball Mania. By the way, if you are new to Underdog and you want to come scoop up all these elite tight ends with me, Underdog is currently offering up to $250 bonus cash and a special pick'em for first-time depositors when you use promo code PETE. This next trio are all priority targets for me: Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, and Dalton Kincaid. All of them go in the late 4th and early 5th round. Andrews is just egregiously mispriced relative to his proven ceiling, while McBride and Kincaid offer true breakout potential in plus offenses. I have no problem taking any of these guys in the 4th round, and they are automatic clicks for me in round 5. Kyle Pitts and George Kittle are the end of the elite tight end tier. If you miss out on the top 5, both Pitts and Kittle are regularly available in round 6. Kittle, like Andrews, seems massively mispriced to me. Drafters are penalizing Kittle for week-to-week inconsistency, despite literally having an example of him being a playoff league winner to the tune of $2 million after an inconsistent regular season. It's wild. As for Pitts, don't take my slappy word for it. Take it from a level-headed Lord Reeves from Sharp Football, who made the case on a recent episode of Best Ball Breakfast.
Going back to the well on Pitts, I know that there are some people are just like, we're doing this shit again. Would you just look at from a top-down basis, all the changes there and him playing hurt last year? How could you not, man? I always try to remind people, he's not even going to turn 24 years old until October. He's only 3 months older than Laporta. Travis Kelce didn't even catch a pass in the NFL until a month before he's 25 years old. We're getting a huge offensive upgrade with Zach Robinson. There's going to be easy buttons in this offense. And then you add the Kirk Cousins factor and just getting a quarterback that can actually throw with some accuracy.
The best thing about all of these tight ends is the prices. We used to pay 1st and 2nd round prices for these guys, and not just Kelce. Waller and Kittle were 2-3 turn picks a couple years ago. Kyle Pitts got steamed into the 2nd round his sophomore year. And because of these discounts, you can pair elite tight ends with all kinds of other dominant strategies: zero RB, anchor RB, a detour for an elite QB. As you can see here, thanks to Michael Dubner's exposure tracker, which I'll link to in the show notes, I've made elite tight end a cornerstone element to my best ball portfolio so far this summer, and I want to diversify my elite tight end exposures across a variety of different structures. One other huge benefit of elite tight end is it also gives you extra roster flexibility throughout the draft. It allows you to stop at 2 tight ends total and use that extra roster spot on another position where you can actually land more reliably on a true breakout. Jacob Sanderson explained this dynamic perfectly in a recent Substack post. He says, the issue with these late round bet on routes type tight ends is that you have only 18 opportunities to select a legitimately league winning asset. And when you devote a pick to Cade Otton, you're now down to 17. We should also talk a little bit about bully tight end, where you take 2 of these elite tight ends. Here's a quick TLDR, compliments of Dubner. The data doesn't support bully tight end as a plus EV strategy. It hasn't really worked out the past 4 years, but this is also the best 7 to 8 elite tight ends we've ever had, and we're back to having awful mid to late round tight ends as opposed to last year. And not only do we love elite tight end for the playoff ceiling, but bully tight end gives us the chance to have tight end ceiling at low ownership, because whenever elite tight ends go off in week 15 or week 16, like we saw in those Kittle and Andrews examples, they're going to come in with high ownership in the finals. As you can see from my overall exposures across all my Underdog drafts this summer, including the side tournaments. I've done bully tight end only 8%. I find it tricky to pull off. I'm open to it when I get a massive ADP value on the second tight end or a unique stacking opportunity presents itself, but I'm not going to go out of my way to force it. What if you get boxed out though? What if you can't get one of these 7 elite tight ends? While I plan to go extremely hard at it, some drafts it won't happen. There will be drafts where you get boxed out, and in those scenarios, it's perfectly viable to fall back on 3 tight end builds. The best way to make 3 late tight ends work is to have a couple of them stacked, either with their quarterback or a teammate. Noah Fant with Geno and Juwan Johnson with Derek Carr are some of my favorite late round tight end stacks in case of an emergency. But if there's one exception to all of this, the elite tight end, the late round tight ends, it's Raiders rookie tight end Brock Bowers. Bowers falls into a typically dicey range for tight end ADPs. He's outside of the elite window, but also too expensive to be a punt tight end option. And yet Bowers is a better tight end prospect than every single one of the elite tight ends we've been discussing. He's being penalized because of landing spot. But if there's a single tight end outside of the top 7 who has the chance to do what Laporta did last year or provide us with a few spike weeks in the playoffs, it's absolutely Bowers. I'm up to 18% Bowers and BBM, and I plan to get even more from here. I love the idea of pairing a top 7 tight end with him or using him as an elite tight end on his own, essentially stretching the ADP definition of elite tight end because of his unicorn profile. I truly think fading elite tight end is far scarier than taking the plunge and accepting some of the bust risk with these guys. In previous years, you might have only needed to dodge a legendary Kelce season, but this year we have at least 7 players capable of going nuclear on both the season or a given week. It's reminiscent of the old late round quarterback dynamic. Even when there was an interesting elite quarterback back in the day, it was easier to fade them because you only needed to fade 1 or 2 of them. But it's a lot harder to not get punished when you're betting against 7 tight ends who could all bury you in a playoff pod. Opportunities like the one we have this year with elite tight ends are hard to come by. The fantasy space, and specifically on Underdog, continues to get sharper each year. The levers we can pull to supercharge our teams in the fantasy playoffs are becoming increasingly more utilized by the field. I mean, they first laughed at 0 RB. They said it couldn't win a tournament, and now it's a nearly default start by ADP. Then they laughed and said week 17 correlation was too galaxy brain, despite what the math said and despite every BBM winner utilizing it on their winning rosters. And now the market is saying elite tight ends don't matter anymore, despite a long trail of evidence that it's a specifically dominant strategy within the Best Ball Mania playoff structure. If you're not convinced by me, there's a wealth of elite tight end propaganda out there from the sharpest analysts across the space. Pat Kerrane, Ben Gretsch, Madison Parkhill, Michael Dubner, Sean Siegel, Jacob Sanderson, and Tom from the Fantasy Sanctuary have all done great work if you want to go down the tight end rabbit hole. I'll drop links to these pieces below as they've helped inform a lot of the thoughts I shared in this video. By this time next year, we'll have multiple tight ends going in the first couple rounds. Don't wait until then to be convinced. Buy the dip on the elite tight ends in 2024 and laugh all the way to the BBM 5 finals.